to the Dignity Dialogue with your host, Joe Kittinger.
Welcome to another Dignity Dialogue. I'm Joe Kittinger. I'm here with April Johnson, and our mission is to spread dignity to the world.
That's right.
We're having conversations with amazing people out there where dignity is at the focus of what they do, and we thought it'd just be a good idea to get these folks together and work as a team to share dignity. And so with us today is Priya Nalkur. Our subject is leading with inclusivity. And April, you had the, I'm just meeting Priya today, and she's like blowing me away in like the 10 minutes we've talked. You had the opportunity to get to know this amazing woman. And so why don't you do the formal introductions and kick this thing off?
Well, it's awesome to have you with us. It's so good to see you. And you know, one of the cool things that happened is that when we got together and met, neither of us really knew, of course, anything really about each other, except that our project manager said, oh, these two have to meet. When she was talking to somebody else, she said, these two have to meet. They have really similar stories. They're totally going to click. They totally have to meet. And so I said, okay. And thank you, Priya, because you said okay too. And we got together and we met and we realized we actually had some really similar stories, some similar experiences of growing up in, let's say, very Caucasian, very one race, one culture areas, and learning kind of what all of that really meant. And we walked through some of our stories together, which was really wonderful just to hear someone else tell a story that you're like, that totally happened to me. I have that story. Yeah. I know what that felt like. So it was really quite healing. To be able to just kind of bond on that, but also just her love for this idea of taking leadership and being as inclusive as you can, and also being willing to talk about hard things and hard conversations, you know, which seems to be the key. Like we have to start talking about things, even the things that are like weird and awkward to talk about, and the things that you think, oh goodness, this person's never going to talk to me again.
Well, I'm totally excited to get weird and awkward because I'm the white Caucasian guy that is trying to learn how to bring inclusivity and not accidentally undignify people. Right. So, Priya, maybe you could just introduce yourself to our audience and give an overview of what you do in the world and what you're all about.
Well, first of all, I'm so happy to be here. And April, you're right. It's amazing that when we share our stories, we start to see some common humanity. And then we're like, oh, I guess I'm not so alone. And that's why I think it's so important that we share our stories and that we listen to people who say, hey, the two of you should meet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And thanks, Joe, for the question. So I'm Priya Nalkur. I use she and her pronouns. I'm born and raised in Canada. I've been in the States for half of my life, and the other half I was in Canada, but I also moved around the world a lot. Today, I find myself leading a firm called the RoundTable Institute, where we're a group of coaches and facilitators who, as April said, coach around meaningful, hard conversations around the issues that really matter. It turns out that people are scared to talk about things like discrimination and bias and racism and sexism. And they're scared because the stakes are really, really high. So we want to make it a little bit easier for people to have those essential conversations where we don't necessarily need to agree, but it's helpful to find some shared wisdom in those conversations where we can actually see each other, hear each other, and try our best to understand each other. So it means disarming ourselves. We teach people how to listen. We teach people how to ask questions. You know, we teach people how to engage in meaningful dialogue and share of themselves the way, April, you and I did the first time we met.
Yeah. And so we're gonna ask you at the end, Priya, but right now, if someone's like, oh my gosh, I need that information now, how would they contact you? And then we'll ask you again at the end.
Sure. So my website is priyanalkur.com. All my contact information is up there. I actually really love hearing from people. I love the personal reach outs. You know, sometimes just yesterday, somebody reached out and said, you know, I took a risk and emailed you on LinkedIn. And I didn't know if you were going to respond because I know you're so busy. You know what? We're all busy. If you reach out to me, you're going to hear back from me. I love hearing from people. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or on my website.
Okay, good.
That's awesome.
All right, so let's kick off this topic of leading with inclusivity, and I'll let the two of you take it from there of where should we start the dialogue?
Well, I think one thing, and I recall when we spoke earlier that we talked about a little bit was just this idea of an unawareness. I said, I talked a little bit about growing up in an all-white community, which I love my community where I grew up, but it was very different, and there was a sense of ignorance to it. And I don't mean that in a negative way. People just had no idea. People had no idea in this very small town. And so when this started to really come on the rise and come on the scene, and all of a sudden everybody was talking about it, right? What is that best way to just begin the conversation? I mean, how do you just begin to talk about these things without it feeling very almost attacking?
Right, sure.
It can feel very confronting. I'm glad you said that. And we don't want to confront people because then they're going to put their guards up and we can't have a meaningful conversation with our guards up. What we want to do is invite people and welcome people into a conversation instead of confronting them. What does it mean to be invited? It means that you're going to come with a mindset of curiosity and deep interest. When you're curious, you have no choice but to listen. You've got to listen, right? When you're interested in something, you kind of shut up for a minute and you take it in. Now, Joe, I'm going to directly respond to something you said. Hey, I'm a white dude, right? Like, hey, I'm a white dude. What can I do, right? And I kind of love that, right? Like, first of all, you're placing yourself, you're positioning yourself. Like, I recognize that I have something to learn here.
Yes.
How can I learn? Okay. So first of all, thank you for asking that question because I think a lot of people have that question but are too scared to ask it. So thank you for asking that because when you ask it, it's an invitation for me to say, okay, here's what I think you can do.
Okay. Awesome.
First,
I love that.
Yeah. So first, naming your position. Hey, I don't know, but I want to know. I want to learn here. So that makes it easy for me to say, oh, okay, I don't have to have my guards up. I can disarm myself. I can get into this because this guy is giving me some safety. Okay. So then your job now is to listen because you said you wanted to learn.
Right.
Okay. My job is to share. And that's when the meaningful conversation starts to happen. If I'm willing to share and you're willing to listen and both of us are disarmed, maybe we can move the needle. Now, in my workshops, sometimes we have people like you say, I'm a white guy, so I should just shut up and listen. And I want to say, great, but I also want to say, but we need you as part of this conversation. It's not cool for you to just sit back and listen. Because April and I don't want to do all the work here. We want you part of the dialogue with us.
And I also have to feel safe to say something that may be completely inappropriate where you're like, okay, let me coach you on that one. You know what I mean? So that's what the white guys face. Like, oh my gosh, I don't want to say anything because if this isn't a safe place for you to educate, right? Then I'm just lost in a moment where something might come out, or I'm just not going to say anything, so I can't participate.
I like to use the word courageous space because safety doesn't necessarily mean we're comfortable, right? Like sometimes we're doing something really physically demanding. We've got to wear a helmet. We've got to wear like shin guards, elbow guards. That's not comfortable, but it keeps us safe. Actually, we have to be courageous, okay? And I think I hear you when you say it's scary. Like, what if I mess up? And that's why so many people don't take the risk because the stakes are high. Gosh, I might be called a racist. I might cause harm. I might be called sexist. They may cancel me. In today's society, those are very real threats, and I understand that. What you have to do, what we all have to do is make it safe for ourselves. How do we build our own courage? We need to be okay with being imperfect. We need to give ourselves grace when we mess up because we will. I promise you we will.
Yep.
And when we model grace to ourselves, we can better offer it to other people as well.
Awesome.
I love that. That is, I'm just letting that like sink in
Me
a
too.
moment because it's so good. I love this idea of courageous. I couldn't help but think about, I was, when I was researching you a little bit, I know that you climbed Kilimanjaro.
Yeah, wow, you picked up on that.
I did.
Yeah.
I saw that. I was like, dang.
I took a helicopter up there once. It's really lovely.
I was like, whoa.
Wow, that's amazing.
This girl is rocking it.
So how many people were on that expedition? Sorry, real quick.
So interestingly, I
Sorry, I'm
went.
totally taking you off.
It's totally okay.
Okay, I don't want you to
No, I
forget the
want you to
thought.
know. I
It's
want you to know.
totally, it's relevant,
It
right?
is.
Here's
It
why.
is.
Because I was the only woman on the expedition.
Wow.
I was with 6 other guys, and we all ranged in age from 24 to 65. And talk about the way they showed up for me, right? And I didn't even ask. But they knew they were physically stronger than I was, or they thought they were.
Exactly.
Many times I proved them wrong. But it kind of didn't matter in the end. It mattered in the beginning. And then by the end, we realized we're all on this journey together. And that mountain climb ended up being a metaphor for stumbling towards inclusion, which, by the way, is the name of my book that's coming out in April.
Yay.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, send us
Thanks.
links
Yeah.
and stuff so we can help spread it.
I will.
Yes.
I will. So the idea is that as we try to reach that summit, and the summit is inclusion, we're going to stumble a lot along the way. And we're going to feel alone in that stumble. We're going to fall, and people are just going to kind of look at us. Some people are going to help us, and others are just going to keep walking. But we realize that, okay, we're all stumbling. If we stumble together, and if I know that, okay, this thing made me stumble, I'm not going to let it stumble me the next time I see the exact same obstacle, then I'll also protect you from that stumble next time too. So if we disarm ourselves, we're going to make it to that summit together, then more likely than if we just do it ourselves on our own, because we're going to hit stumbles that I didn't know about. So you
Yeah.
don't have to make the same mistakes I did. And
I
it
love
turns
that.
out, we've done like a lot of research on this, and in leadership, bringing this back to inclusive leadership, there are 8 stumbling blocks that leaders typically hit on their path to building inclusive workplaces or communities. And all of us have different stumbling blocks. Like for me, one of my stumbling blocks is called the blame bearer. Like I tend to blame myself when people on my team feel hurt or discriminated. I take responsibility. Turns out that's a stumbling block, right? So like that, there are 8 stumbling blocks, and we have an assessment on our website that people can take for free to see, okay, what are my stumbling blocks so that I don't make the same mistakes again and again and again.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Giving that opportunity for people to learn from what we have learned, right? Share what we have learned. Those things that have caught us up, those things that have caught us off guard. To be able to share that. We talk about that a lot with Dignify, just sharing and sharing your story. And we all have one, and we can all learn from one another's story, together. So, and that's that idea of courageous. That's kind of what really stuck with me when you were talking earlier. Like being courageous has to be a part of leadership, because leadership is hard and it's vulnerable and it's raw. And I love it because of that. And it's hard, and I sometimes miss it. I
think too, when people hear the word leadership, they mistake it for, well, I don't lead anybody, right? We're talking about leadership, leading your life. You lead yourself first before you can lead anyone else. So it's not about being a manager or being in a business and leading. You may lead a family, you may lead a child. It's positive influence, helping someone reach something that's beneficial for them and for the community. And that's what leadership is. And so I can hear that loud and clear, Priya, with what you're talking about, and you as well, April, that, having courageousness in leadership is having courageousness in life, period. End of story.
Period. Yes, it's so true. People come to our programs and they're like, "Oh, this isn't for me. I'm not a leader." And I say, "Okay, hang on a second. Whether you like it or not, you better own that you are, because just the way you move around in the world, you are influencing the people around you.
Yep.
And you may not like that, but you better own that,
That's
because
right.
that's a responsibility." Yeah.
I agree.
Yes.
In our classes that we teach, we talk a lot about, of course, about leadership, and that same thing kind of comes up. And I talk a lot about your circumference of leader, your leading circumference. Like within my circumference are all my leading opportunities, whether it's my direct report that I lead every day at work, or it's the girl at the drive-through window, who I love, the girl at the drive-through window at the coffee shop, by the way. Shout out to the girl at the coffee shop. You know who you are. But I love it because I also can have an opportunity to example, even to the girl at the drive-through window, a moment, a positive moment, an encouraging moment, whatever that might be. Anything in my circumference is mine to lead.
Yeah.
Including myself, of course.
Now you had a question
such
with
a
the
great
with the mountain climbing. Do you remember what your original question was before we went off on that wonderful little ride?
I know. Well, I really wanted to. It was this idea of courageous, and I thought when I read that about you, and of course thought, wow, rockin', like totally love this. The courage that it took to go and do it, right? And to not stop. I sometimes think about, we only go so far with folks, and then we kind of stop because all of a sudden it gets really hard, or I have to ask questions that feel really difficult to ask. I think we're just going to leave it there, and so you end up stopping at like the first camp or the second camp, but to go the courage to go and get farther and farther and farther up that mountain, and not turn back, to not give up. I just thought, wow. And so it kind of does connect with this idea of being that courageous leader. So I just wanted a little insight on what that was like for you to continually choose to go forward instead of turning back.
Yeah, it's so true. I didn't really give myself a choice to stop, and it's the same thing with my commitment to dismantling injustice. I don't feel as though I have the luxury to stop. It just means, so I got to live in Tanzania for a while I was, climbed the mountain, but I was also doing a lot of research there at the time. So I got to live there. I learned Swahili. And when you're climbing the mountain, they tell you, just keep telling yourself in your head, pole, pole. These are Swahili words that mean slowly, slowly. So it just means take one step, and then take another, and then take another.
Wow.
And you might fall, but then you'll get up, and then you can take another step. And I will tell you that mantra has been so helpful, because it allows you to stay true to your choice to keep going. And there are so many moments on that mountain of courage when you are confronted with your courage, like, am I courageous enough? Can I do this? But to me, the tension was, you feel pretty good about yourself when you get to the top, but you also are reminded that you are so insignificant, right? You get to the top of one of the world's biggest mountains, and you're like, gosh, I did it. But gosh, I'm so insignificant. And that was such an important tension for me, to say, yeah, I can do it. If I can do this, I can do so much in the world. It really was a very meaningful metaphor for me.
Wow. That's so cool. That's so cool. I love that. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is we've had really little conversations about it, but it hasn't been something that that has come up, and we've talked about it very much. But you guys talk about it, I think more, and it's this term called microaggressions, right?
Yeah.
And I am intrigued by it,
Is
and
that
I
our
don't.
dignity ding?
It's kind.
Is
I
that
think
kind of
it's
like our
kind
dignity
of.
ding?
That's kind of what I get to. I think it's kind of like a dignity ding. When someone dings your dignity, they can.
Oh,
They can
yeah.
have
Put a
lots of little dings,
dent in it.
and it still brings down the value of who you are. Or you can have a really big ding, and
Yeah,
it brings, and that is all you needed to bring down the dignity.
Yeah.
But so I kind of feel like it's a little bit like that. But I know that you guys have some courses on it. I mean, it's kind of a big thing for you guys. I would love to hear your take on this idea of microaggressions.
Yeah, I think it's such an important thing. So I'm glad you kind of named them that, microaggressions suggest that there's a magnitude to it, that it's small, but it turns out the effect of a microaggression can be very significant. It's these daily slights that can be intentional or unintentional that remind us that we don't belong. Okay? So it's kind of like going, if you are disabled and need a wheelchair and there's no ramp for you, right? Or it's somebody telling me, right, I'm born and raised in Canada, that I speak English so well. Like it sounds like a compliment, right? It sounds like a compliment. I think it's coming from a good place.
That's a white guy thing. I think that reminds me of my parents, and just maybe something that we're going to get to that. We have to get to that. You guys have to help me
to
on some
that
of this stuff.
generational.
Well, April and I shared this story, right? It was like we both had this incredible similar story where in elementary school, we were singled out for having lice. And it turned out in my grade, only the kids of color were sent home that day. And April had the same experience. She was like, well, Black people don't really get lice. So how was I sent home that day?
Yep.
And so these things happen. And the truth is, I like to believe that people are good and they don't mean the impact that they had. But we need to learn how to manage it when they happen to us so that we're not home alone crying into our pillows at night, feeling as though we don't belong. And thanks for reminding me of that, because it happens to underrepresented and underestimated people more often than we'd like to admit. So we have a course on how do we manage it? How do we recognize it? The first thing is that we need to believe each other, because what the truth of my discrimination lies in my subjective experience. You may say, well, I didn't mean it that way. It doesn't matter. What happened to me was a hurt. It caused harm. And your first obligation is to believe someone when they say that hurt me or that wasn't cool with me. And then if you can believe them, then you can have a conversation. But if you're going to get defensive, if you're going to say, well, that's not what I meant, I'm sorry if you feel that way, it's really hard to move forward from that. And in that workshop, we talk about how, okay, once you believe them, then how do you have that productive conversation? We go through the steps of having a productive conversation around it.
Yeah, we talk about dignity dings, and I use a metaphor of, because we're from the Midwest, we have the Great Lakes, right? And so there was a story I read in Lake Superior, and years ago in the newspaper. Yes, I was reading a newspaper, and it talked about this natural harbor that for decades people had this natural harbor off of Lake Superior that protected, from the wind with their boats and everything. And the zebra mussels, if you've heard about this invasion of the zebra mussels, they came from salt water, so they can exist everywhere, and they feed off of things and they start to hurt the environment. And they have these little tiny shells, and they're superly small, insignificant. You think, what is this little tiny? Why is this such a big problem? Well, this narrow channel, because of how the currents were, blocked the zebra mussels with the currents. These tiny little things made this wall fortress that these boats couldn't get out anymore. So it talked about a story about the community coming together, getting a barge, getting a big backhoe, clogging it all up, and it lasted for maybe 6 months or 4 months. Of course, you have winter in there too, but then by the time the next spring came, it was all clogged again. We use that metaphor as dignity dings, or what you're talking about, like dings on dignity that, okay, we're starting to work together, and even in a marriage, you said this thing or you did this thing, and I'll let you off, right? Not that big. Our harbor is deep. But without speaking about it, all of a sudden it builds and builds and builds, and pretty soon this pathway to communication, and I see it especially in marriages, becomes, I don't want to be married anymore. And one member, usually the man, says, "What are you talking about? What happened?" I mean, we counsel people where often the man will be like, "I have no idea what I did," right? But we're not talking about it, and so. Yeah. We need to talk about these little dings on dignity or these microaggressions to prevent them from being a harbor blocker, you know?
It's no longer an ease and in a safe place. It's no longer a courageous space. And I notice that often it is whether it's, a husband and wife, in a marriage, or a leader and their direct report, or two people that work together for a long time, whatever that might be. But over time, it becomes this space where one person doesn't feel safe and the other person can't figure out why you don't feel safe, and then they just kind of coexist in that space, right? Instead of coming together and recognizing, realizing, and having the conversation, and then moving beyond it, right? And growing from it, and having an even stronger relationship, and even stronger, sense of conversation. I mean, I remember, as you had mentioned, with the whole thing with, being sent home from school, and, that getting that letter, to go home and cut all of my hair off, as a young person, was so, it stuck with me for the rest of, it was still something I worked through when I went to counseling in my 30s, and I had to still work through that. And I don't believe that the folks that were involved were in the, behind a closed door going, let's give her this note and let's make sure she just feels terrible, this little third grader, I'm certain that was not the case, but they often have no idea of the impact that makes. And I remember the day that my grandma said, no, the year that the note came home and my grandma said, we're not doing that. Find somebody else to check her hair. If you guys don't know how to do it, find somebody else to do it. We're not cutting her hair. And as soon as that was it. As soon as that happened, it was like a floodgate opened of conversation. We didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. We didn't want to step on anybody's toes. Right. But all of a sudden, my grandma just said, that's enough. That's enough. You have no idea what this does to my granddaughter when this happens. And now we have to have this conversation. Yep. So that conversation element is so key. It's hard, and it's so necessary.
Yeah. That's what it was for me too, April. It was like that moment where I got sent home and I just thought, okay, this is the way it is. And my mother was your grandmother, right? My mother was like, nope, this is not okay. And she didn't want me to see what she saw. But what I learned was that I don't have to accept that. I don't have to accept just because a teacher said something or because somebody else said something. As a brown kid, you think you have to accept the world as it is. And it takes you some time. It takes your role models like your grandmother or your mother to say, stopping the pattern here.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think that's a cool piece that comes back to even Joe, what you're talking about earlier, as the white guy,
Which I have a game we're going to play, but go ahead.
And because Joe also doesn't have to accept it. Like he doesn't have to accept how his parents maybe responded. And I know Joe's parents, and they're delightful, just to be clear. They're incredible people. And
incredibly ignorant.
And it
in
was
certain topics,
and
right?
it was a different time.
Yeah.
It was a different generation. It was different.
Yeah.
And we can't necessarily we can't judge by that
Right.
either, right? We have to be
There's that
careful.
grace. The way you're speaking is it's a offering of grace, right? Okay, well, let's put it into context. Why are people the way they are? Because they grew up in a certain way.
Mhm.
Because they grew up in a certain time. They're part of a certain generation. That's grace. And if they heard you say that, then it's like, okay, maybe I'm willing to learn. Maybe I'm
Right.
willing to open
Right.
up. But if you say, no, you're ignorant, you're lost, I can't help you, it's not going to open up anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, you ready for the
All right.
white guy Caucasian game?
Oh, this is a
And
hoot.
this one, do you have a pad of paper, Priya? Because I want you to do
Yeah.
it. Okay, I want to see if you guys align on these answers. And I'm kind of making this up as I go, but these are situations I've been in where I'm like, go or no go. So it'd be go, no go, or depends is what you have to mark. And after you have to mark your answer, then I want to see what each one of you would answer.
No go and depends.
Okay.
Okay. We're not talking about the product. We're talking about
no, like should I? Is that
situational.
appropriate?
Okay.
That's a no go. You don't do that, or it depends.
okay.
Oh, this is great.
Are you ready?
Okay, let's go.
Okay.
Number one, I have dear friends who are from Guatemala. And when they come to the door, I go, the Guatemalans are here. And they rush in and they hug me. Go, no go, depends. Because they make a big Guatemalan feast and they're like, bring their food with them and we have just a blast. Okay, Priya, is that a go, a no go, or depends?
Okay, so it depends on the relational context. Since you have a friendship and you have some camaraderie here, I think, and it sounds like they receive it with affection. It sounds like they have given you consent to speak in this way with them and to call them the Guatemalans, then I think it's okay. But I would never, ever, ever do it that way if you didn't have that relational context, you didn't have permission, and you didn't have consent.
Yeah.
Aligned
and you can
on that?
say,
Are you
I
aligned?
checked.
Okay,
Depends.
next question.
Depends. My
Okay, do you have
question.
more on that, or-
Yeah, my question was going to be back
And
to
you know who our dear
gosh,
friends are.
and they
It's like my daughter.
They are amazing. the friends
yeah,
that Joe is talking about, they are
Oh,
amazing.
they are.
Yeah.
They are.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the reason why I say no. And the reason I say no is because we don't ever want to reduce people to one aspect of their identity.
Identity.
We are all complicated. We have intersecting identities. But when you say, hey, here come the Guatemalans, we're seeing that one aspect of them. And we're othering them from who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be extremely harmful. And since you have a relationship with them, right? It's
And I
kind
wouldn't
of
do that if there were
understood.
other guests there. I wouldn't refer to them
Right.
as
If it
other
were the
guests
first time that you were
there,
meeting them,
sure,
or you
totally
were
get
just
it.
getting to know them, it would be a completely different question.
I'm on the same page. I
Yep.
would know right from wrong on that based on what you guys said. Okay, next question. I don't know April. Let's just assume that. And she's an amazing performer, by the way. Okay, and so I'm looking at, now I'm in show choir, right? My kids are in show choir. So I see this amazing entertainer up on stage among 60 kids, okay? And I go to my friend or whoever's sitting next to me and I go, who is that amazing girl up there? And they go, which one? There's 60. The black girl. Go, no go, depends. Right, your answer? Because that's a big one for me. I'm like, because I'll say the Indian girl. You know, the very minority, right? So there's one of the, but I don't know if that's a go, no go.
It
or-
is such a good question. It's such a good question. And I'll be honest with you, I'm having a
Like,
hard time with
I know.
this one.
I am too. I'm back and forth,
Yeah.
back and forth. I guess
And
that means it's a depends.
I actually,
That
for
one,
me,
that
it's a
one needs
go.
to be either a no or no go, guys, because there is no depends on that one. Maybe if I'm sitting next to my best friend, but a lot of times I'm sitting next to a parent who I really don't know, but I see they're Caucasian.
I would
and
go
they'll
with
go,
a
which
no.
one? I'm like, the right one from the left to the black girl.
No,
You know
for
what I
me,
mean?
For me, it's a go. Okay. Now, we also have to recognize that we may be making all kinds of assumptions about that person when we say that black woman. First of all, we've assumed that they identify as a woman. We assume that they're black. And we're making some assumptions. But we also have some common vernacular around this where your friend is likely to understand what you mean when you say that. If possible, it would be great to check in with that person afterwards, right? Like, have a conversation, create a relationship, build a bridge with that person, and then move forward. What's weird, I think, is when we pretend not to see race and we're like,
Right.
oh, the woman
Yes.
with the black sweater and
That's what I'm
jeans.
saying. I think yes, exactly. That's the thing I'm in.
Yeah.
I think it is. I mean, when I describe, and I think this is why I struggled with it as well. When I describe somebody, I have often described Caucasian women. I'll say, oh my gosh, they have the most beautiful porcelain white skin. That might be a no-go.
Totally
But
go.
like as I'm describing them, they have they have green eyes, they're tall, they're like, it's part of their description, it's part of their beauty, it's part of their physical being, and I would describe, I've often said, oh my gosh, that like caramel skin, it's stunning. Like it's just stunning. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
In different context, it's hard to know if you just throw it out there. And I think that's what makes that difficult.
Well,
for
especially
people.
if
And I think what we have to do as leaders is diversify our personal worlds. What I mean by that is when I have a lot of Black friends in my social network, then I've understood them and I know how they might guide me in that moment. My boyfriend is Black. I've asked him this exact question before. He's like, of course, I would use the word Black too, right? And then I said, well, is it okay for me? I'm not Black. Yes, that's how we identify ourselves. The more Black friends I have who give me permission and through whom I can understand the way we can talk about our worlds, the more comfortable I am to say that. But if I have no Black friends, no people of color in my life, no gay friends, etc., and all my friends look just like me, I've got to ask myself a different kind of question if it's okay for me to call that person Black or not.
Oh, that's a great one. Is it African American or Black? That was on my list too.
Yeah, my boyfriend is clear on this.
Okay.
He says Black.
Black.
He says Black. And everyone I know, all my Black friends say Black. And their reason, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but this is what I've learned. I've learned that for Andre, he doesn't relate to his African heritage. He relates to his American background. And Africa for him is a continent on the other side of the world. And the same way it is for me. And I've actually lived there and he hasn't, right? So for him, it's Black.
And that's a great point. And it's something that we don't say out loud very often. And many Black people feel very much the same way. I have a dear friend, my son's best friend is married to a woman from Africa. And she refers to herself as African.
Because she's from Africa.
Because she is from Africa. And she prefers that's how you refer to her. She's not African American. She isn't from this she wasn't born here.
Yeah.
She wasn't raised here. She is African. And so she prefers either African or Black because that is something that crosses both continents. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yes.
Yeah, and we get to ask. My son was auditioning. He loves acting. And the casting director asked him, "What is your ethnicity?" And I thought, okay, this is the test. I'm standing on the sideline waiting to see what my son is going to say. And he says, "My family is Canadian, Indian, and we live in the United States." And I was like, "Oh, Zane, I love you so much. That was the perfect complicated answer."
Which leads to my last and final question, which goes right into that area. Okay, and Taylor is our engineer back there. Taylor, you're included on this, okay? So I want you to think in your head, is this a go, no go, or depends, okay? And I'm not your boss. I'm just asking a question as a white guy, okay? Right? Asking the question. So if you see Taylor, she's just this authentically unique talent, and she has a really cool look about her. So is it appropriate, go, no go, to go, Taylor, what's your ethnic background?
Oh, it's a go for me.
I think it's 100% go.
Yep.
It is. Taylor?
I would say go as well, as long as you phrase it correctly, because I've ran into a few instances where it's like, makes me feel a little uncomfortable, but as long as you phrase it how you did, I would say it's a go.
Okay, explain.
Yep.
Can you remember a phrasing you received where you're like, that's not comfortable?
I get a lot of, what are you? And that's
Yes.
very like, it makes me feel icky.
Yeah.
Like, what am I? I'm like, I'm a human. That's what I am.
I am.
Yes, girl. Yes.
So when it's like, what's your ethnicity? What's your background? I feel comfortable answering that. I'm like, I'm half Caucasian, I'm half white, and I'm half Korean. So it's an easy answer to that.
Yep.
Yep,
Okay.
I like that.
And
I've gotten
it's so good.
gotten that too. I've gotten, what are you? I've gotten, here's where I would bristle. Somebody once asked me, what's it like to be Indian? And I understand the intent of that question, but how do you begin to answer,
Yeah.
right? Like if I asked you, what's it like to be a man? What's it like to be a woman? How do you begin to answer that?
Right.
Again, being reduced to that one aspect of you, let the person, that open-ended question, what's your ethnicity, is far more inviting and inclusive than what are.
Then what are you? And I do get that question often. I get people they'll guess. They go, "Gosh, you kind of look. Are you native? Are you And they kind like they guess.
Yeah.
Are you Italian? I'm like, I like pasta. I mean, what are we talking about? Like, how is this? Where
Yes,
is
I
this
love it.
going?
I love
right?
pasta.
I don't know where
I
this
love
is
Italian.
going. And it is something that my whole life I have kind of always had to speak to, because I don't necessarily, I guess, look like what the typical maybe mixed kid, who then became a mixed adult, looks like, at least in this area. So people try to guess kind of where I fit, or they've heard something about me being black, and they go, "You don't look black."
Yep.
Okay, well, I still am, regardless, right? So
Yeah, like this is what black looks
this
like.
is what black looks like, at least for me, and it looks like something else. But again, having some of those moments and opportunities to sometimes correct with grace, I've been in those situations where I've said, I would, I'll tell you, and that was a little awkward. Here you might want to ask it this way. But I have to say that growing up as a kid in northern Wisconsin, an all white community, and spending my summers in Milwaukee, in southern Wisconsin, which has a lot of different ethnic races, but a lot of the black race, I didn't fit in either of them. Just to be clear, I kind of didn't fit in either of them. And, growing up in the 70s and the 80s, it was probably to be expected. I think that's very different now. And so even with our young kids and our teens, and even, our elementary kids, I have heard stories of them doing different trainings and things like that in their classes and talking about these things, and them looking kind of at each other like, am I supposed to feel like negative about you? Because you're just my friend.
Right.
Like,
We've come a long way.
So it's interesting to see the dynamic and the change over time. And how do you allow our young people to kind of just be, right? But at the same time, right, if we do nothing and we say nothing and we teach and we don't teach any of that, we can fall into the same pattern, right? Thoughts on that? This younger generation.
I agree with you. I think, kids are going to tell the truth. And if we can teach them early and often skills like empathy, taking perspective, listening, I think it's a shame that we don't have courses on communication for kids, like basic communication. How do you listen? How do you ask questions? How do you have a conversation? How do you empathize? If kids were if they had that in their toolkit, they're going to grow up to be much more inclusive. They're going to grow up interested in other people and less defensive about who they are.
Well, that's our mission, Priya. When you discover the Dignify system, it started with understanding my stepson, Alex, and how he sees the world and how to communicate with him. That was in 2009. And now we want to have those conversations. I envision, having courageous leaders who take all these snapshots and they take the names off and the genders off. And they look at just the heart of dignity of what this person is all about and say, how can they help grow this company? Take the names off, take the things off. Let's just look at pure dignity and what drives this human being to be awesome. And that's our mission. That's clearly your mission, to have these conversations. As we close this out, Priya, what is the last thought that you'd want to share with our audience? And then, of course, remind us how to get a hold of you if anyone's interested. Yeah. But what would be some closing thoughts you have for encouragement?
Well, there's that word encouragement. We talked a lot about courage today. Encouragement is about let's be courageous. So my invitation is that there are moments every single day in front of you to restore justice. And I want to ask you, are you going to notice that moment? Are you going to act? Or are you just going to watch it happen? And it's going to take some courage, but I want to invite you to act, experiment, believe that you can make a difference, and go for it. So to get in touch with me, my website is priyanalkur.com. You can take the assessment there. It's 15 minutes. I think it's really insightful for you to see where you land in your stumbling blocks. And you can also pre-order my book, Stumbling Towards Inclusion. But I also, of course, welcome people to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I post a lot. I share my stories because I think it's important, like we already talked about, for people to share their stories because it reminds us that we're never alone, or at least not alone as we think we are. Thank you so much. This was really, really fun and so rich.
And thanks for playing White Guy Trivia.
Yeah. Oh my.
Actually, it's more of a survey.
I love it.
No, it was very eye-opening for me. This has been therapeutic for me. I'm so excited to have you now into our little family.
Yes.
Right. Of connection. And we're international with Canada coming together.
Oh, and I just have to say, it's just been such an honor to get an opportunity to talk to you before the podcast. And today, this has just been such a joy. And I'm looking forward to reaching out and continuing our conversations as well.
Thank you both. Have a great day. Thanks.
All right. This has been another Dignity Dialogue with Joe Kinninger and April and Priya. Have a great week.
See ya.
This has been the Dignity Dialogue with Joe Kinninger. Talk at you later.